Well, hypothetically speaking.
Okay, I got it. All that game.
Did you write that?
All that game.
Hypothetically speaking.
I got it.
So hoping he would do that. I was like, man, come on, coach.
You throw me off my game. I'm very focused, like laser.
Like we got to figure out what hypothetically means and go with it. This is a tough one because Carson Wentz, they're projecting to come back for the opening game, but we saw with Andrew Luck that that's not always the way that it goes. And really with Ryan Tannehill, him coming back from injury too soon doesn't go that way. So you got to consider that factor. What he did in the playoffs was incredibly surprising to me and really unprecedented in a lot of ways for a backup. We see year in and year out where those backups go in and the team can't do anything, and someone who's projected to win it all can't even compete at that point. So I like that part too. His salary cap number is good. If they do trade him, they'll take about a $4 million cap hit. So that's a consideration. But he is on a one-year deal. And if someone gave you a ridiculous amount of compensation, I think you've got to pull the trigger and move forward. I think as soon as we start talking about number ones or multiple number ones or anything like that, then you've got to take a step back and say, this is in the best interest of the organization long term.
If the offer was flatly a mid-first-round pick, is that enough to make you start having the conversation?
Yes. Without a doubt. When Jimmy Garoppolo only merits a second-round pick, then if someone's pushing Nick Foles into the first round, and look, his body of work is very inconsistent. He had a big year, and then he had some off years, and then he got cut or moved on from two different places, and then he comes back and has this streak.
Listen, there's only two game films, and that is the Minnesota game and the Super Bowl that you're going to put in a tape reel to be able to send to teams to be able to try to sell Nick Foles as being their starting quarterback. You mentioned some things that are very, very important. His salary cap number. So if he was to get traded for, you have to sign him immediately to a contract extension. Now, we saw what the going rate for starting quarterbacks is. So which team is willing to not only give them a first-round pick at least, but also willing to give Nick Foles between $15 to $20 million? Now, as far as Philadelphia saying, hey, there are people calling about Nick Foles, you must approach the Sam Bradford. Let's go back to when Sam was traded and what were the circumstances. Minnesota was desperate, all right? They had to trade a 1 and a 4 to get a starting quarterback because they didn't want to forfeit the season. They felt as if they had a championship caliber team that needed a quarterback. So that's the reason why they were able to get a first and a fourth. And the season was already here. Right now we're in the offseason. Teams are not desperate, and Nick Foles would warrant a huge contract extension. So I believe that Philadelphia right now is a lot like New England was with Garoppolo. Remember Garoppolo? Oh, it's going to take 2 number ones. Oh, during the season, it just took a lonely little number 2. So I don't believe they're going to be able to fetch, even if that was their asking price. But if you get at least a number 1, you have to look at what's best for the organization, and that would be to move Nick Foles if they were able to get another number 1.
Okay, so this is really interesting to hearing it from you, because when we talked about this right after the Super Bowl, you were pretty adamant that Philadelphia has no reason to move, obviously, Carson Wentz or Nick Foles. That they got a good situation. Nick Foles likes where he is. He appreciates what a talent Carson Wentz is. This is the best place he's been. Is the only thing change has been that at the time it was thinking, would Nick Foles get you a 3rd-round pick or just a 4th-round pick? Is the reason that you're more open to it now because the floated compensation is so high?
Well, let's look at Garoppolo. They end up getting a number 2. That wouldn't be enough for me to move off of my backup. Okay. And also, my franchise player is not going to get on the field for at least 6 months. So with those things that I don't know, I have to keep him there as insurance.
And the other thing that happens is whatever's going on in the most recent past, so Andrew Luck, Ryan Tannehill, 2 quarterbacks, they thought were going to be there for the start of the season. They thought were going to be able to play, and then weren't. As a club, you start to take a step back and say, we don't want to be in that situation.
And look what those teams had to do in desperation. When Indianapolis, they didn't have Luck. They had to make a desperate trade with New England for Jacoby Brissett.
Right.
Man, Miami was so desperate, they went and got the Cutler from the TV booth and brought him to Miami. So you don't want to be in that position, Coach.
No, you don't want to be in that position. Right now, optimism is high. You've got free agency coming up, and there's quarterbacks available. You've got the draft coming up, and there's those quarterbacks that are available. When you get to the start of the season or training camp and your guy goes down and you've got a good team, or maybe you're in a make or break season for the GM or the head coach, that's when those values start to skyrocket. And if you're the Eagles and Carson Wentz is looking good, you think, okay, now's a good time to move on.
But doesn't the question have to become, you have to look at this guy and say, could Nick Foles be your full season, everyday starter? Can he take you, in 16 games or whatever, what he did in the last, 2 games of last season? I mean, you have to buy into that.
Absolutely. And Chris's point is really important.
I'm not trying to buy that.
It's a question. It's a big question, and you've got to give up draft picks and money. So there's a ton of resources that have to go into this guy. You're getting married with a very big diamond ring.
And I want to make this part clear for the audience.
Now I
because
understand.
he's under contract for the next season, $5.5 million. The reason Chris says you'd have to give him a new deal is if you give up a first-round pick for a guy, it's not to have him for 1 season. Now, if he were on the market for a 5th-round pick, then you wouldn't have to give him the big deal. You could say, okay, we'll try him out for a year. But if you trade a first-rounder, it is because you expect him to be your quarterback long-term.
Minnesota had Bradford under a deal for a couple years. Yep. That's what made it a little more enticing, and the desperation of the season starting.
And they started 5-0 with Bradford. That team was really good until it got further decimated with
Also, Bradford could be, if they got off Nick Foles, Bradford could be back in Philadelphia as a backup, as a viable option. Him or Case Keenum, who might not be in Minnesota after this quarterback shuffling.
All right, Coach, stick around. We'll see you a little bit later in the show. Coming up, Kirk Cousins narrows it down to 2.